Kyle here from All Media Reviews, here to attempt to do at least the second part of Modern Progressive Art Rock Origin, the 1990s, the second part of the 1990s, 1995 through 1999. One thing I was just going to read off all the different genres I came up with. There's just like a million of art rock, art pop, art folk, art metal, art alternative rock, prog, alt prog, indie prog per indie rock slash indie pop plus indie folk, college prog per college rock, new prog, new NU dash prog, indie tronica, dance punk, progressive post hardcore, prog adjacent, prog related, crossover prog, atmospheric rock, atmospheric pop, atmospheric folk, progressive pop, prog pop, chamber rock, chamber pop, baroque pop, post rock, post metal, jazzy post rock, math metal, math pop, progressive folk, progressive R&B, progressive dream pop, progressive shoegaze, progressive power pop, progressive psych, neo psychedelia, psych pop, psych folk, psych electronic, stoner prog, modern art rock, modern art pop, modern art folk, modern conceptual rock, modern art pop, and retro art pop. That's not even all of them. Anyway, that's why this whole thing is just such a frustrating thing. It's been for like 20 some odd years. But so I'm gonna go on to the second half, starting in 1995 of the 90s, and try to dive into the year by year process for the actual modern progressive art rock. So the first one I have is Echolin's "As the World," which was released originally on March 7th, 1995. Their third album, proper album, and probably they're the first on a major label. I mean, they're only on a major label. Um, the most well known. I got the guys to sign a summit at Nearfest in 2002. But yeah, this is a great record, and while it is prog, it does lean like the vocalist always has sounded like Maynard from Tool to me, a lot like him, and it still emphasizes melodic sense and a little quirkiness versus just. I mean, they have a big Gentle Giant influence, and Gentle Giant's a band that's influenced some of the stuff that like bands like Rain Kindo and um I don't know, like the band that just ugly, Anyway, but Echo Lynn's "As the World" is an excellent record that is progressive rock, but also is art rock. It's kind of weaving little trinkets and stories, and it has little like there's one song about cheese, I think, but that last song, "Never the Same," is just a heartbreaking, just heart wrenching, melancholy track. It's about the loss of someone, but anyway, "As the World," March 7th, 1995. So literally, let's see, the day after. And I'm not including much from this band because I'm not a fan of them, but I would never deny their impact, influence, importance on this so-called genre, umbrella genre term for so many bands of the last, 25, 30, 35 years. Radiohead's The Bends, which has Planet Telex, the one Radiohead song I can kind of stomach. I think it's not the one with Creep. Creep was something with the other one, but the one Pablo Honey. Anyway, I'll just say that I'm not one who's going to revisit it, but in terms of influence, I can't deny it. The Radiohead's been came out March 8th, 1995. So then a couple weeks later, the official release of, I know I'd seen 94 as a release date once, but Kevin Gilbert's Lone Soul album, which you say a lot of things about it. It's stripped down compared to some of his other work. It's not as layered, but it actually is pretty layered. But it's definitely progressive in a lot of sense of just the instrumentation, some of the algorithms, the lyrics. Very kind of left of center, folky kind of singer songwriter pop rock and song like, of course, like um, Shadow Self is crazy layered with vocal effects and stuff like that. I've talked about it ad nauseum a little less than like whatever 9 months ago, back in March of last year. But anyway, this came out on March 21st, 1995. Um, let's see here. So after that, in '95, you had without the services of their original and long-term guitarist Jim Martin, who had left the band March 28th, literally the week after. Faith No More's follow-up to Angel Dust, King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, which to me was their last great record. I mean, the one that followed it was okay, album of the year, and then the one that came out as a reunion was okay. But this record has some serious, like, cool, like, odd time signatures and some, of course, their blending of styles of funk and loungy kind of stuff and metal and almost hardcore Mike Patton. But they kind of reinvented their sound a little bit. King for a Day, the title track is great, but kind of a concept album because it's like, Gentle Art Making Enemies. It's designed. But anyway, Faith No More. I paid a pretty penny for it. King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime came out on March 28th, 1995. And the same day, actually, the very same day, I had this wrong. It was toward the end. The Tea Party's third album, sort of proper second, but their first album was like a demo of some kind. But a lot of fans' favorite, The Edges of Twilight, Canada's own from Ontario. Sister Awake is the biggest banger on this record, but this is great dynamics. It's not purely Zeppelin-like. Jim Morrison singing with Zeppelin. I mean, there's still a lot of that, like they had on the previous record, Splendor Solace, but um, dark, kind of almost gothic at points, very kind of brooding, very blues rock, but very rhythmic, very percussive at points. The trio, the Tea Party, but The Edge of the Twilight, some people consider their masterpiece, came out on March 28th, 1995. So that month, March, was a big month for this kind of the evolution of the style, where you had Echoland, Radiohead, Kevin Gilbert, Faith No More, and the Tea Party. So then a few months later, not much left in 1995 that I had on my list. Marillion followed up their masterpiece in a lot of respects, which was definitely different from their style artistically. Their last, I think it was the last one on EMI, Afraid of Sunlight, was kind of like a rushed album, but it really wasn't. Some of the stuff may have been written during the Brave period, but has really become a favorite of a lot of fans, and it's similar and different in a lot of ways, but it's like in a good way. Less is more. But the title track is one of the best pieces they've ever done. King is fantastic. Ian Mosley's drum work. Beautiful. I mean, there's a lot of melodies on it, but it's not as deep and dissonant or ominous or bleak as Brave. It's not as conceptual as Brave, of course, but Afraid of Sunrise, Afraid of Sunlight, Out of This World. Most Marillion fans like it. Not all. Most fans of the H period, at least, especially. So that came out on June 26, 1995. And to round out 1995 progressive art rock, well, I didn't include their other records in the previous video. I probably could have. I'm including Saigon Kicks, to me, their masterpiece, Devil in the Details, which, yes, it still has elements of hair metal, but, they were doing some very artsy, proggy stuff. If you're going to put King's X and Galactic Cowboys and Faith No More, Saigon Kick belongs in that sort of window, although I don't know how much of an influence on a lot of the bands the 2000s it had, but, there's a lot of Beatles elements on here. There's just a lot of great melodies and different kinds of song. Russian Girl is an all-time favorite, and Spanish Rain is just dreamy as hell. So Saigon Kicks, Devil in the Details, according to Rate Music, was released on October 17th, 1995. So that was 1995 for the origins of progressive art rock. 1996, which is even a shorter list, actually. First one that I had came in April 23rd, the sophomore album from Canada's, along the lines of the Tea Party and another band I'll be talking about, I'm Mother Earth's second album, Scenery and Fish, the last album with the original singer Edwin, who also was on the Victor album. The Victor album, you could say, actually indirectly might also fit in here. I probably could have included it, but this one has the standout track. There's many standout. Is Earth, Sky, and Sea. The drum work is unbelievable on that record. But they're doing the Carlos Santana stuff. They're doing the groove metal. They're doing the grunge thing. Very kind of syncopated riffs and a lot of odd time signatures. But yeah, Scenery and Fish, original release on April 23rd, 1986. A great record. A great follow-up record for I Mother Earth in 1996. So moving on. Cats are doing some stuff. I'm including Ear Candy from King's X. While it's not as renowned as all the Sam Taylor or even Dogman, Sam Taylor albums, it still is very poppy, probably their poppiest record. And so the power pop especially, has so much of that. And it was their first record, I want to say, on Metal Blade. But yeah, great record, even though, again, it's not as liked, but a lot of people do like it. It's one of the records people turn to when they think of King's X, oddly enough, after Gretchen Goes Nebraska. So Ear Candy came out on May 20th, 1996. I remember when I got it, I had not heard of King's X, but later that summer, I saw them live with Galactic Cowboys. So then I have the sophomore album, again, another band like Radiohead I'm not a fan of, but I will acknowledge the importance of it. Tool's Einema, I believe that's how it's pronounced, came out on September 17th, 1996. So yes, again, the Tool sort of fandom and style was starting to really be felt for a lot of young musicians at this point, which will later lead to bands like Dredg and Fair to Midland and so many other bands that were great in this style. So then the final one, a band that shares a little bit with Tool, some of their later stuff more so, I'm including here, is Porcupine Tree. Now, I could have included Sky Moves Sideways and, their first album, But I think that this album, they were starting to kind of lean a little more towards songs, although it's still space rock. But yeah, I mean, Signify was kind of the first Porcupine Tree album I liked. I mean, you have Voyage 34 and you have the other space rock stuff, but and this has some space rock on it, Signify. But this was released originally on September 19th, 1996, so right 2 days after Anima. But yeah, 96 was kind of for my familiarity, a little lighter year for the influence of this, but it was still happening. So yeah, Signify from Porcupine Tree, September 19th, 1996. Porcupine Tree's very important band, even though they're considered prog rock by a lot of people, or psychedelic rock, the Pink Floyd influence. They bridge that kind of mixture. They focus on songs. They don't have too many long solos in a lot of their music. It's it's not so poppy that it's kind of commercial, but it's poppy enough to still appreciate the songs. It's kind of that happy balance that I find with a lot of progressive art rock. All right, so then we go to 1997 and we see Marillion again. Well, I'm considering this record a little bit overrated now. Again, Marillion were doing songs. They were doing prog and doing songs. So that's why the progressive art rock still fit on their album This Strange Engine from 1997. It came out April 9th, 1997. It has the epic title track, which is almost purely prog. But songs like Man of a Thousand Faces, 80 Days, Estonia is really sad and melancholy. A lot of this is pop rock. So, I mean, that's what bands that like a little bit of art rock or a little bit of prog, but not so much, might have appreciated a lot of the sorts of more straightforward songs on The Strange Engine. But anyway, that came out on April 9th, 1997. I remember when it came out, it was like a really big deal. It's the first like new album that came out after I became a fan. So then I had this flipped actually. That was April 9th. So a week before that, I missed this. The debut album from Denmark's Muse, Triumph of Man, while including some debut albums, and this is a little sacrilege. I want to include some of these, and this is nowhere near the top of the list of the favorite Mew albums. They got their start, and it has a few pretty fun tracks. Coffee Break, I Would Have Been a Shinside for You, Wheels Over Time. If you're really into Mew, you appreciate this record, and it came out originally on April 2nd, 1997, so it was a week before The Strange Engine, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of taking some liberties on some bands putting their early records, which are less favorable. Here it's a double disc that came out as a reissue. But anyway, A Triumph of Man, original release on April 2nd, 1997, and certainly we're going to be hearing a lot more from you in this series on the history of progressive art rock. They're a very important band of the 21st century for it, especially. So then the next month on May 21st, you had Radiohead again put out their sort of maybe the most influential record in this whole style, maybe outside of Jellyfish or maybe with Jellyfish. Their album OK Computer on May 21st, 1997. Yeah, everyone and their mother who likes any type of indie rock or art, any psychedelic rock of the last 25 years knows this album, at least knows of it. Of course, it had Paranoid Android. I still can't stand Tom York's voice. I think they're kind of people have overinflated this record, but I wouldn't deny it's still influenced so many bands and albums that I love that it has to be on the list in the history. So that was May 21st, 1997. So fast forward a few months later, and we get to August, and we see another debut album, like Mew. We have Godspeed You Black Emperors, F sharp, A sharp, and this is a record I haven't listened to in a long time, but they had like an EP before this, but post rock these sort of started the beginnings of, you had bands like Talk, of course, doing it. It might include some of the stuff in the 80s. You had stuff that sort of started that band that from Chicago, that jazzy instrumental band I'm not thinking of. But, really, Godspeed was one of the most important bands in the quote-unquote post-rock, whatever. Soundtrack, kind of newish kind of soundtrack type music. But it was bleak, but it was sort of the right mood for people that wanted to escape his music. And it's just 2 tracks, I believe. And, they just kind of didn't care. They're doing their own thing. This is very much anti-establishment and very artsy in that sense. So F sharp, A sharp from Godspeed You Black Emperor, originally released on, where was I? August 14th, 1997. 5 days later, we see the Tea Party again. We got 2 Canadian albums with their album Transmission, which was even more of a departure from like Splendor Solace and even The Edges of Twilight from the year before, 2 years before that, with Transmission. More electronic and almost industrial. I mean, Nine Inch Nails certainly had an influence on a lot of this music as well. I'm not really fully including them, but they could be arguably. I remember listening to this, and it's definitely heavy. It's very riffy. It's dark. It's atmospheric. and it's an interesting left turn they took, and I appreciate it. I don't like it as much as Edge of the Twilight or Splendor Solace, but it's still a good record transmission, which was released originally on August 19th, 1997. And to round out 1997, we see the band Big Wreck with their debut album, which is literally came out like a few days or weeks before they went on tour with Dream Theater on the Falling into Infinity tour. That I saw them, like it was like October, November. This came out October 21st, 1997. Their album In Loving Memory of, which there's a grunge element, there's a power pop element, there's definitely some great vocal arrangements. Yeah, I mean they do some detuning guitar, so they were influenced by likes of like a King's X or a Faith No More. Yeah, I mean I don't like them as much as the Tea Party or On My Other Earth, but I've always liked them, and this is probably their best record. But yeah, Big Wreck have a lot of good records that have come out since this. So anyway, In Loving Memory, originally released October 21st, 1997, Ian Thornley. So to round out, moving on to 1998 though, we start out with another band with another. There are a lot of bands that have been listening to some of this stuff, like your Jellyfish and Faith No Mores and stuff like that, and Marillions and King's X's. You had Vast and John Crosby, of course, with their debut album Visual Audio Sensory Theater, which is still my favorite Vast album. They have some other good records. They have a couple of good songs, but this is to me their best record. Came out originally on April 28th, 1998, which actually I'd say there's a Jeff Buckley influence. They share a lot of similar traits to U2 and Ours, and but yeah, Vast is a band that I like. I've never loved them, but a lot of the Ours fans really were into them. John Crosby has his reputation, but their studio albums, some of the quality of their studio albums can't be denied. So, and this is their masterpiece for me, Visual Audio Sensory Theater, originally released on April 28th, 1998. So then you have speaking of Jeff Buckley, the posthumous archive demos, which really they're polished, and he rethought them and reworked on these for at least a year and a half, 2 years. Some of them go back before even Grace came out. Sketches for My Sweetheart the Drunk, which has several songs I love, like Vancouver and Everybody Here Wants You. Nightmare by the Sea is fantastic. New Year's Prayer, Sky as a Landfill. It's got his cover of that weird cover of Back in New York City, and some other covers I think are on here as well. But yeah, Jeff Buckley's I like this album beginning to end slightly more actually than Grace, and that's why it was a big deal. I know someone who worked at Cheapo who actually was really excited, was totally pumped for this when it came out on May 11th, 1998. Cheapo in Minneapolis, that is. So then we had another debut album. A lot of debut albums, of course, after the early 90s, the mid 90s. System of a Down, Serj Tankian's sort of, new metal, art metal, heavy metal project. Their self-titled debut album, and it's not as quirky as experimental as some of their later works, but it still has enough. I like the records that followed it more, but still worth including sort of the history and the influence. They certainly influenced Fair to Midland. Fair to Midland was signed by Serj's label, Surgical Strike Records, and they've influenced a lot of other bands, especially the heavy art rock bands. I mean, Dredg, Serj did a remix of some of Dredg songs at one point. But anyway, System of a Down, their debut album, self-titled debut album, came out June 30th, 1998. Very political, although I don't think this is quite as political as some of the ones after it, of course. So, so then, let's see, June 30th, 98. Then fast forward a few months later, and I think this is the second album from Mansun. England's own Mansun. 6. This is their proggiest record, for sure, and it's kind of gained a little bit of a following in later years here, since Mansun broke up. But yeah, 6 is a really important record. If you've never heard it and you like bands like Radiohead or Tool, well, I don't say Tool, but I'd say Oceansize, Ours, Dredg, Muse, you should definitely give Manson's 6th album especially some attention. Coming out originally on September 7th, 1998. And a couple weeks later, we see Marillion again with their most Radiohead-like album, Radiation, which is an album that's totally grown on me. I love it now. A Few Words for the Dead's my favorite on this, it's melancholy in some ways. Kind of uplifting in some ways, though. 3 Minute Boy, Under the Sun, The Ants Machine, those are all bangers for me. These Chains, I love, too, the string arrangement. Fantastic album. Very artsy. Then, let's see here. We're on 98. October, that was September 21st, 1990. Then October 20th, 1998, you had King's X put out another album, Tapehead. Not as good as Ear Candy, but still some ways more interesting. It's a little darker, more riffy, more like Dogman in some ways. Over and Over, Ono. Groove Machine's one of their staples. A little bit of soul. Great record from King's X, but not on Tapehead. It was on Metal Blade in 1990. To round up their last album of the 90s, they had a really prolific decade, King's X, and influence on this sort of mixture of prog and songwriting. So then to round out 1988, you had on December 16th, Kevin Moore's first solo album. After he worked with Fates Warning on A Pleasant Shade of Grey, he did his solo album, Dead Air for Radios, came out. It was very textured, very new agey, but also artsy. It has songs like Colorblind, Even the Ways, Undertow, America the Video is great. Of course, it's a lot of keyboard and synthesizer driven. And then On the Page is my go-to. Although, yeah, there's another version that's on here. It's song like Mouse. It's like art electronica, really, in a lot of ways. And he has other records I like, but chroma key stuff. But I think this is my favorite. It's a lot of people's favorite, Dead Air for Radios. So going on to the last year of the 90s to wrap this whole origins up, we see Porcupine Tree a few months later in March, because that Dead Air for Radios came out December 16th, but March 22nd, 1999, you had Stupid Dream for Porcupine Tree. More song-oriented than Signify, of course. Still some spacey textures, but it has like Even Less, Don't Hate Me, A Smart Kid, Stop Sweating. Very melancholy, but Steven was definitely leaning more to doing more song-oriented stuff with Porcupine Tree, more melodies, more kind of textures, and not so much of the sort of long-winded compositions as much, not jamming stuff. But anyway, Stupid Dream, an important record, certainly. The whole Porcupine Tree catalog really is. So then I included a power pop album that was following the footsteps of Jellyfish. We had the late Owsley with his debut album, which I've grown to really like a lot of. Oh No, the Radio, the first song is the most well-known on it. But yeah, Owsley. We have a few other artists, including himself, I'm going to be talking about in a minute here. But yeah, Owsley's debut album came out on March 23rd, the day after Stupid Dream, 1999. So then we got the big debut album from Dredg, which was independently 98 from, at shows, and then 99 independently again. And then it came out on a major label in 2001. Leitmotif, a concept album about, a guy's trip through sort of like exploring different areas. They were heavy, they were textured, they were very conceptual, very psychedelic. Samples were used. It was Gavin Hayes' vocals were very unique. This was a breath of fresh air to hear if you were around that time. I didn't find out about it till later, and this is probably Dredge's heaviest album, oddly enough. But this is art metal. This is art, very much it's first art, then it's progressive prog art, you want to call it. So Leitmotif, originally or released independently with more distribution, I guess you could say, on May 30th, 1999. So then you have, let's see here, you have the Tea Party follow-up again with their album Triptych. Triptych? Yes. Which is an album that I've liked, but I've never loved. But again, I kind of feel like this is sort of like the sequel in some ways to Transmission, but not quite as good. But I haven't listened to it in many years. I mean to do a Tea Party a video, rather. And yeah, I mean, this is kind of the most underrated Tea Party album of that early period, I think. But anyway, Tea Party's Triptych came out June 8th, 1999. So then, here we go. I'm not messing this up. No, okay. Then you have what I believe is, I thought it was the second, maybe the debut album from Sigur Rós to follow up the heels of Godspeed You Black Emperor's debut album. I guess I get this version. I mean, this album, while it really flows well. I haven't listened to it in many years, though, as well. I need to be in the mood to listen to Sigur Rós, but I have a hard time kind of between this and Brackets, the one that followed it, which one I like more. But certainly very important in the history of post-rock, and post-rock being a sort of subgenre of art rock or progressive art rock of the 21st century or modern progressive art rock. Sigur Rós's I Get This version is very important. It came out June 12th, 1999. So then you have, in July 13th, you have Breakfast with Girls, sort of not the second Self album, but maybe the sort of the breakthrough in some ways from a standpoint of doing more artsy power pop-ish stuff. He was more channeling Weezer and doing more sort of pop punk at points with his first couple records. So they're still experimental, but he kind of hit all on a stone. This is where This album was probably more, although I guess you could say in some ways the debut album is more influential than this, but influential on the stuff I love in terms of power pop of the 21st century. Breakfast with Girls was super important. Came out on July 13th, 1999. Owsley included, of course. It came out right around the same time, just a few months apart. So then you had on September 7th, 1999, you had the debut album from Muse, of course, very Radiohead like, Showbiz. Not my favorite Muse album. I like Muscle Museum, is it? I believe. Yeah, the second, and Sunburn. The production kind of bugs me at points, but it's still an important record because Muse became a very important band in progressive art rock, and to not include their debut album would be a mistake. So that was September 7th, 99. So then to round out the decade in 99, you have Marillion.com. Marillion putting out an album almost every year. This album follows on Radiation and is almost more polished in some ways. Interior Lulu is the epic track, but there's a lot of like catchy songs like Rich and Deserve on here. Go is very dreamy. There's definitely a Radiohead influence, and they influenced bands that came after this that wanted to sound a little bit like Radiohead indirectly, you could say. House is dreamy and jazzy. So then the final record in the decade in this Origins is the debut album, another debut album from the band Three from New York, from upstate New York. Their album Taint by Numbers. While Coheed and Cambria they were Amputee. They hadn't put out an album. Coheed and Cambria, this came first, and actually it's 5 years after they played at Woodstock in 1994. But songs like the title track, Lay Down the Law, Wrong Side is super power pop-ish. This is a great debut album from Three. So yeah, Careless Kim. This is my favorite Three album, but it's certainly important. Three really don't have any bad albums. This record certainly is included. Paint by Numbers. That came out on November 30th, 1999. So that's the sort of history, story, origins of the list of a calendar for modern progressive art rock. I'm going to go on to the year 2000, hopefully soon, maybe tomorrow. I have next 2 days off. Maybe doing a couple of years of me doing more obscure stuff, of course. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.